Hi, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update here on social media. Thanks for joining us. A lot of breaking news even as we go live here on video on the Manafort Mueller investigation. A federal judge is excoriating the Mueller special counsel operation. I'll get into that. Again, we've heard news this week about the Mueller questions they wanted to target President Trump with. I'll talk about that. I'll even talk a little bit about Stormy Daniels. And of course, Judicial Watch is in the middle of it all with a new FOIA lawsuit against the Justice Department over the Clinton DNC FISA court abuse. And on top of that, we're trying to save our elections by defending voter ID, this time in Alabama. So it's a busy week here at Judicial Watch, and I normally don't do breaking news, but this is something that I think is warrants bringing to your attention as quickly as possible. Because this morning there was a court hearing over in Alexandria, Virginia, in one of the Paul Manafort cases. Now, you may not know this, but Mueller took Manafort to court in two jurisdictions, here in the District of Columbia and over in Virginia. Again, further evidence that Mueller was showing Manafort who's boss. He filed one set of charges in one jurisdiction and then stuck it to him with another set of charges in another jurisdiction. I think in this case in Alexandria, related to bank and tax fraud. Now, the judge in that case, Judge T.S. Ellis in Virginia, he's been on the bench a long time. He was appointed by Ronald Reagan, so he's been on there for decades, and he's seen it all, especially if you've been on the court as long as Judge Ellis has been. And as according to the news stories, he challenged the Manafort case, he challenged Mueller, he suggested the special counsel was lying and just going after Manafort to get at President Trump. Pretty incredible stuff. According to the Politico, Josh Gerstein did the report. I don't see what relation this indictment has with what the special counsel is authorized to investigate. You don't really care about Mr. Manafort's bank fraud. What you really care about is what information Mr. Manafort could give you that would reflect on Mr. Trump or lead to his prosecution or impeachment. There you go, you had a federal judge call out Mueller for the dishonesty of his investigation, that people like Manafort aren't being targeted because of his crimes, allegedly. It's because of his association with President Trump. And this is the fundamental abuse of the special counsel process. It's what's troubling generally about many prosecutions at the federal level, where they go after people and come down on them with like a ton of bricks as they get others up the chain, or targeted people up the chain, so to speak. And I know when it happens to mafia figures and drug kingpins, people don't care much about it, but we've got to be sensitive when we've got crooks, when we've got the targeting of alleged crooks like Manafort that would never have otherwise happened but for their association with a political figure. And this is what the judge is calling out in terms of the Mueller operation. And it's something that is significant because, frankly, the judge has the authority to throw the whole case out if he doesn't like it. And he's demanding more information because the court is being told by Manafort that we've got authority to investigate this, but it's secret authority. And the judge says, oh, really? He said, this is what you're going to say. He says, I want the document telling you what authority you have. And he quotes the special counsel's office as saying, we said this is what the investigation was about, but we're not bound by it, and we were lying. So you may recall Rod Rosenstein had when he appointed Mueller, had a very narrow description of what Mueller was supposed to be investigating. Russia collusion with the Trump campaign. Now, Manafort's been indicted on all sorts of unrelated charges to that. His representation for Ukrainian organizations, his alleged mortgage fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion. Nothing having to do with Russia collusion. And this doesn't mean that Manafort's innocent of anything. It just means that there was no authority, the Justice Department had no good reason to be looking at him under the authority granted the special counsel. And what Rosenstein did was he wrote a memo 4 or 5 months after the fact, in August of 2017, granting Mueller this authority to investigate Manafort supposedly on these Ukrainian issues. Manafort had already been investigated by the Justice Department and Mueller himself. So this was an ex post facto and after the fact rationalization, a CYA memo papering the record to justify the improper prosecution of Manafort. That's what the judge is getting at, and the judges demanded that memo. And the pushback from the Mueller investigation is, well, you can't see it because there's national security information in it and it's secret. And the judges said, I think the quote is, I'll be the judge of that. So now we have a federal judge calling out Mueller for the abuse of authority that Judicial Watch has been calling out since virtually day one. And I'm glad to see the president he has a new lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is also calling it out. Rudy Giuliani has said that Sessions should step in and shut it down. We've been saying the same thing for a year plus. You know, and the president is concerned, he is not dealing with honest prosecutors in the sense that they're trying to get out the truth as opposed to just trying to get his scalp. And that's further indicated by the release of questions that Mueller has proposed to ask President Trump. You know, there are 40 questions or several topics that he's looking at, and they're available online, and I encourage you to look at them. I don't need to read them to you here. But I can tell you they don't have much to do with Russia collusion. They have a lot to do with this so-called obstruction of justice crackpot theory that's being broached out there by the left and Democrats, and I guess the Mueller operation, which is a front for them at this point, that somehow the president obstructed justice by exercising his ability to fire people like James Comey, and for merely talking about firing others because he was upset with the way the Justice Department and the special counsel was operating. And a lot of the questions looks like Mueller is pursuing information raised in the Clinton-funded Dossier. Mueller is still using the Dossier to target Donald Trump. So you can imagine why the president and his lawyers are hesitant to sit down with this crowd. One expert says he looked at the questions, it would take them 2 days to get through this with the president. What is the crime that this investigation is investigating? The Mueller investigation. What is the crime they're investigating? No evidence of Russia collusion. There's certainly no evidence of obstruction of justice, and you just can't come in as a prosecutor and question a president of the United States to satisfy your curiosity or to pursue some sort of partisan agenda like impeachment. His testimony isn't needed. And if he doesn't back down, the president should fire him. Or tell the Justice Department to fire him. I don't, look, the goal is to impeach the President of the United States. That's the goal here. Mueller thinks he could indict him. He'd probably try to indict him, but there are constitutional questions there, significant. I don't think the president could be indicted at this point. So if Mueller is allowed to continue, because I think he's demonstrated, the operation has demonstrated the bad faith and the partisan nature and the bias, it's going to result in a report encouraging impeachment. And of course, if he fires Mueller, the left will go crazy and say they need to impeach President Trump. So he's danged if he does, danged if he doesn't. And my view is, do it and do the right thing, because it's not just about the president and impeachment. It's about people like Manafort, General Flynn, and others being improperly targeted by the Mueller operation. I don't know, there may be people around President Trump, maybe Manafort did things wrong and deserves prosecution. But I think he's only being prosecuted because he was campaign manager for Donald Trump for a time. And this is leverage, as a federal court judge has noted, to go after Trump. And I tell you, if a court gets that bee in his bonnet, that the prosecution of a government or a quasi-government official, in this case a political figure, is being done for improper purposes, the whole thing can be called off. So this is a significant development, a federal judge excoriating the Mueller operation, and I don't know, maybe Manafort will not get his request, the charges get dismissed, and this is just a judge yelling on the bench, and he backs off at the final issue, in the final ruling. But the fact it was said out loud by a federal court judge is a significant development in terms of a positive development for the rule of law and accountability. And along those lines, I guess I'll talk about the Stormy Daniels thing. I don't know what to make of it. I keep on trying to figure out what the scandal is, other than perhaps the underlying relationship, assuming it took place, and I can't assume it took place. So Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who's now the president's top lawyer, was on TV, he was on Sean Hannity's show the other night, and he essentially said that Cohen, the president's lawyer, was reimbursed by the president for the payment that was made to the Stormy Daniels person in exchange for her not talking about any alleged relationship with President Trump. Or not talking at all, frankly. So everyone went crazy because they said, well, the president said he didn't know about this. Well, I didn't see anything that Giuliani said that necessarily conflicted, if fairly construed, with what the president has previously said. He said he didn't know about the payment. And he wasn't told you need to pay this to reimburse Cohen for this $130,000 payment. What Giuliani said was that Cohen was the president's lawyer getting whatever amount, I think $30,000 a month retainer, to take care of issues like this, and that's how he was reimbursed. It didn't mean the president wrote a check to cover Stormy Daniels expenses. It meant that Cohen just took the money out of the retainer that he was getting on a regular basis from President Trump, or then candidate Trump. So I don't know what the scandal is. I mean, the media is more focused on the fact that somehow the press operation in the White House didn't know what Giuliani was going to say. Well, I guess if you want a well-run White House to have the communications arm knowing what the president's lawyers are going to say, I guess that would be good. But it ain't a scandal. It's just Washington politics. And there's no credible information or evidence out there that there was a crime committed, either in the reimbursement, the non-disclosure agreement itself, or anything else related to that decision to enter into the agreement with Stormy Daniels by Cohen. So this is, the hyper-focus on this in the media is just extraordinary. And they're talking about campaign finance crimes associated with this. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I know a little bit about campaign finance issues. And this is not a campaign finance issue. And if it is, it's something that can be fixed with a little paperwork, and at worst a fine. But you never know, because with the Justice Department being run essentially by Robert Mueller, everything can be blown up, right? So that's why you had this news this week, first reported and then retracted by NBC, that there was a wire of Mr. Cohen's phone calls prior to that outrageous raid on his office by the Justice Department, Southern District of New York, FBI, et cetera, at the referral of Robert Mueller's investigators. Well, in fact, what happened was that I don't know exactly what happened, because I don't know if there was a wire or not, But now NBC is reporting that no, it wasn't a wire. They talked to some federal officials who supposedly knew what was going on, and that there was a, quote, a pen register. And a pen register is used to track incoming and outgoing phone calls. Just their numbers, though. The phone calls aren't recorded. But we also have reconfirmed that they were looking at his email. All of this, Cohen's email, all of this prior to that raid. So Cohen has been under investigation for some time by evidently either Mueller or the Justice Department. Again, this is the president's lawyer. I don't believe they had a good faith basis for opening an investigation for Cohen, into Cohen, but for his relationship to Donald Trump. And this is why I keep on saying that President Trump should consider kind of a blanket pardon for anyone who's been a subject or a target of the Mueller investigation or any referrals related to it, like Cohen. General Flynn, Paul Manafort, Cohen, I don't know who else. Some have pled guilty, even those who have pled guilty. Because they wouldn't have been targeted but for the fact they worked or were associated with the Trump campaign. This Mueller operation is out of control and should be shut down. We had a federal judge excoriate it. He doesn't believe a word they're saying. He said it in open court. They're hiding the basis for his appointment, the fundamental facts of his appointment, the scope of his appointment from Congress and from Judicial Watch. I've never seen so much secrecy around an independent counsel or a special counsel operation like this. I've never seen it. I've been doing this work for 20 years. And along those lines, we just had to sue again this Justice Department over some basic information about the scandal. The scandal isn't Stormy Daniels. The scandal isn't Trump-Russia collusion. The scandal is the misuse and abuse of federal government agencies and law enforcement to target the Trump campaign and now President Trump. That is the scandal. And it involves Barack Obama. It involves his top cabinet officials at the national security law enforcement level. And frankly, there's some complicity now with even appointees of President Trump over at the Justice Department. And specifically, it relates to the FISA court process. Remember, they used the Clinton DNC dossier to get a surveillance warrant on Carter Page, who was a recent Trump organizer or Trump volunteer. It was a backdoor way of getting it to Trump. And the conclusion of those who have looked at this, Devin Nunes' memo, the full committee report, is that no dossier, no warrant. They didn't tell the court it came from the Clinton DNC crowd. They didn't tell the court that Christopher Steele was persona non grata at the FBI. He had been let go, which is outrageous enough that they were even using him as a source, this Clinton vendor. And you can bet they didn't tell the court that then the number 4 official at the Justice Department, Bruce Orr's wife, was working for Fusion GPS, the very group that was behind this dossier. So Devin Nunes, the head of the Intelligence Committee, has asked for the FISA court transcripts of hearings where this might have taken place, where these discussions took place. And the chief judge for the FISA court, Judge Rosemary Collier, I think it's how it's pronounced, she wrote back, she says, look, if you want them, ask the Justice Department. They have the transcripts and they have full authority to release them if they want. And of course, the Justice Department isn't going to turn them over to Congress. We asked for those transcripts under the Freedom of Information Act, and we were told we can't get them. Well, actually, they just ignored us, I think. Let me see how they responded. Yeah, they ignored us, completely ignored us. Sometimes we ask them, and they say you can't have them for reason X, Y, and Z. Other times they just ignore us. This is the Justice Department, which is supposed to follow the FOIA law. They ignore it all the time. And it's gotten worse since President Trump, under the Trump administration. And that's something that Jeff Sessions needs to be held accountable for, because this transparency is a disaster at the Justice Department. So we're suing in court to find out about how the Clinton DNC dossier was abused and misused to gain this illicit FISA warrant, because it is illicit. If it was gotten in bad faith. Look, this same crowd that is targeting Manafort, a federal judge has said, maybe you're doing this in bad faith. Boy, maybe the FISA warrants were done in bad faith as well. That's why we want the court transcripts. And it's shameful that this Justice Department isn't turning them over and that we have to fight for them. And this follows up, we've already done dossier lawsuits for the underlying FISA applications, the written records that were submitted to the court. But you know, that doesn't tell you everything. So that's why we asked for the transcripts. Because the FISA court is I've never been involved in it, but based on my understanding and from folks who have been involved in it, it's less formal than you might think. There's a lot of give and take between the court and the prosecutors, and because the court is only hearing from one side. It's a secret court proceeding in the sense it's not public. They discuss classified matters. So the court is constantly going back and forth with prosecutors in a way that doesn't necessarily always happen in regular federal court proceedings. That's why it's important to get the transcripts. Because the court process breaks down if we can't rely on the Justice Department and the FBI to tell the truth to the FISA court. Because that process is done in secret. And we've got to rely on the FISA court to be honest and those talking to the FISA court to be honest. And if we can't trust either one of those entities, the warrants that are issued from there, that process, are suspect. And it's essential we do that, or we have that confidence, and they reassure us that things were done properly by releasing information when questions like this arise, so people can have confidence in the fair administration of justice. So that secret surveillance isn't done improperly. I mean, I know you mostly agree with me on this. Why is this a question for the Justice Department? Why is it? I don't understand it. Well, I do understand it. You know why? Because Mueller is using the dossier and they don't want to release information that would harm his investigation or expose it for the mess it is. So as we go from one crisis to the other is the assault on our elections. And the left doesn't like the idea. I mean, if you think it's just bad here in Washington, you're wrong. The rule of law is under assault throughout the nation. And many states, I think 37 to 38, have a type of voter ID law. Some are better than others. Most people agree with voter ID. Don't believe what the left tells you. It's not race-based, blacks, whites, whatever. Everyone agrees and likes voter ID. Not literally everyone, but large majorities do. And so to make up for that, the left plays the race card to suggest that voter ID is designed to suppress minority voting. And Alabama, and there's no evidence of that. And Alabama has a voter ID law that was upheld by the lower court. And I'll explain to you a little bit about the court process as best as I'm able. So when you go into federal court, you go before, initially, usually, a U.S. District Court judge. That's kind of the first layer. So Judge Ellis, who I talked about, that's a U.S. District Court judge. And if you don't like whatever rulings they make, at the appropriate time and place, you can appeal it, and that's when you go to the appellate court. And that's when you hear appeals courts. And more or less, if you don't like what an appeals court does, you can kick it upstairs to the Supreme Court. So there are essentially three layers of review. Now, I know you lawyers out there, there are all sorts of buts and caveats. I know them. I know what the caveats are. I know what the exceptions are. I'm just going generally here. In the case of this voter ID law, the district court upheld it, and it's now before the Fifth Circuit, the 11th Circuit in Alabama. So these appellate courts, essentially, the courts are divided into circuits. So there's the 11th Circuit, which covers the Southeast. Here in the District of Columbia, it has its own special circuit. It's the U.S. Circuit Court for the District of Columbia. California, infamously, is part of the 9th Circuit. You've probably heard about the 9th Circuit. New York is the 2nd Circuit. New England, I think, is the 1st Circuit. So that's how the courts are divvied up. So the 11th Circuit is hearing this appeal of a ruling that the left lost, challenging the Alabama voter ID. And essentially, the left is trying to make the argument that if one person of color is hurt by a voter ID law, it necessarily has to be knocked out. And the courts don't take that as a point of, that's not what the law is. The law is, look, you gotta have, you need to know for sure that the law caused the harm to the minorities at issue here. There's to be a direct causal relationship under this disparate impact theory, as I like to call it, which I think generally is bunk. Because you could have a neutral law that may adversely affect minorities, but is still a good and constitutional rational law. Now, if you pass a law to specifically target minorities and deny them equal treatment of the law, obviously that's not good and it should be shunted aside. But that's not the issue here. As we point out, voter ID protects all races. It's applied equally across the board. It's not designed to stop anyone from voting because of their race. It's designed to make sure that only people eligible to vote are allowed to vote. So we filed this amicus brief before the Fifth Circuit with our friends at the Allied Educational Foundation, asking them to uphold the Alabama voter ID law. Now, the good news is, under the Obama administration, the radicals running the Justice Department were challenging voter ID laws across the country. And obviously that's changed with Jeff Sessions' Justice Department. There's good news there for the Jeff Sessions' Justice Department. But the left-wing interest groups are challenging voter ID laws still. They did it in Texas, they're doing it here in Alabama. And so Judicial Watch filed this amicus brief with AEF. And I encourage you to go online and read it, but I want to give you a big picture thing here. There are, I think, a handful of groups on the right who share our values. I can think of 3. Handful of lawyers who are expert in this area who are trying to defend voter ID laws. The left has legions of lawyers on the other side, dozens of groups. This is a major focus of the George Soros network that you've heard about. His funding focuses heavily on this. The left is focused heavily on upending voter election integrity measures like voter ID. And I know they're fighting us in court elsewhere because Judicial Watch has this major election integrity project where we are pushing states to follow federal law and make sure their voting rolls are accurate by taking reasonable steps to make sure that dead people are removed from the rolls, that people who move away are removed from the rolls, and other ineligible people are removed from the rolls, such as illegal aliens or legal aliens who aren't allowed to vote in federal elections. And that's not the case in many states across the country. We had to warn at least 12 states. We've sued Kentucky because they're one of the worst. And we just sued California and Los Angeles. because they have, in many places in California, more people on the rolls than are actually living there and eligible to vote. That's a pretty good indication they're not taking steps necessary to clean up the rolls. In fact, in California, I don't think they ever really remove anyone. They call them inactive, which means you just show up and vote. Doesn't make a difference. But you're still on the rolls, so you can come in and vote in someone else's name, and there's not much to check you from doing that, including the names of dead people. I mean, that's our concern, and that's why we want the rolls cleaned up. And I know in the California case, a group of leftist groups are trying to intervene to defend the lack of election integrity in California. So the left has a lot of forces arrayed against the rule of law, and I'm convinced the left wants to be able to steal elections if necessary. They would have you believe there's no voter fraud and, just close your eyes and go back to sleep. But we know there are a lot of close elections in this country, and voter fraud does happen, and it happens in sufficient amounts to change the outcome of elections. But separately, the American people have a right to expect from their government that elections are conducted in a way that protect against fraud, so it doesn't become a joke to participate in elections. So that's what should be happening here. We need voter ID. We need states to make sure their rolls are clean. And frankly, we need to go to the next step and make sure there is citizenship verification for people seeking to vote. Yes, citizenship verification. We have tens of millions of aliens living here in the United States, both legal and illegal, who aren't eligible to vote, yet studies show are on election rolls and do vote in numbers large enough to affect the outcome of elections. So Judicial Watch is against stolen elections. We're for clean elections. And we're fighting the left every day on this. And it's a significant issue for Judicial Watch. You don't hear the politicians in Washington talking about it. Whenever they talk about it, it's a left-wing politician defaming those who want voter ID by suggesting they have racist intentions and making sure elections aren't dirty. So, I know it's just one filing we made, this amicus brief, but it's part of a comprehensive effort by Judicial Watch to protect election integrity. So I encourage you to track our work there. And we're working with citizens in California and in Kentucky and in Maryland on lawsuits related to making sure the rolls are clean. And we've been in the forefront of trying to protect voter ID laws from this assault by the left. Just because the Obama administration has left town doesn't mean the assault has stopped. So thanks for joining us this week. It's been a busy week, and we'll be back here next week with more information on the swamp and the scandals infesting it. Thank you very much.